we get this for folks. And then I'm gonna share my screen and we'll get started here. I think I'm gonna leave this out of presenter mode only because I lose all the people when I hit presenter mode and then I can't see chats or anything. So I'll just use it this way. I got to tell you, when I was working on this, there were a couple other topics that I really wanted to include, but I have been waiting for guidance from the department. And so I'm going to hold off and hopefully have more information next month to share on some other topics. So I'm not sure. I still think this will be helpful, and it's certainly an opportunity for us to connect if there's questions, but it maybe isn't quite as impactful as what I was thinking we were going to be able to talk through. So Amy Alfrey from the DE sent me her updates. She is at a conference. She just got back to me yesterday and said she's not going to be with us today, but I do have some updates from her that I will go through. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about reevaluations and exits from the lens of the impact of the AW case in Iowa, and just starting to think about how this impacts special ed teachers and school teams. We've spent a lot of time at the AEA talking about how it impacts initial evaluations, but it also really impacts reevals and exits, which school folks are a lot more involved in. And so I want to share some of that today, and then also talk about what can we do to support teachers around this. Then a little bit about services and non-pubs and picking and choosing. Which I think I had on the first one here, and then I don't have it farther in, so we'll come back. We'll make sure to talk about that. We're talking about graduation. I want to talk a little bit about exits. I didn't update this slide as I worked on this yesterday, so we'll just be surprised by what's here. Okay, so updates. Actually, the two updates that I had, Amy also had in her DE updates. I apologize she didn't send this to me till late yesterday, so I will, when I link the PowerPoint on the website, I will be sure to update the handout so this link is live, so that everybody will have this after the fact, but I will share it now so you can see it. So first off, they've added 4 new people at the Department of Ed. She wanted me to make sure that everybody was aware of that. Eric Gebhardt has joined to coordinate the SPDIG grant, which is a federal grant that the state is in their 4th year of. And it is the grant that has funded all of the work that's happening around specially designed instruction. And so Eric will be coordinating that grant for the department. Melissa Tandy has been hired. It's actually a joint position that's half DE, half AEA system. And she will be doing work around special ed procedures that I'll talk a little bit more about here in a few minutes. Therese Jurgensen, who used to be in Howard Wynn, has joined the DE team, and she is in charge of PBIS, anti-bullying, and the school counselors. So we're excited to see Therese move on to something new and different for her professional learning. And then Kristen Lane is the secondary transition consultant that was hired. And when we talk about graduation and the changes there, Kristen is the person who's supposed to be leading the teams that will be developing the resources and helping kind of figure that out for our state. So we're excited that that contract has been in the making for quite a while. And I'm just glad that they got it figured out and Kristen is hired. First thing that she wanted me to remind folks about, and I'm curious if anybody knows if they received theirs. So the B13 support levels were supposed to be released on October 15th. I have not heard from any school about that, if they have received their designation or not. Vicki or Mary or Joe, do you know if you received your designation? They may not be with us right now.
And that I don't believe that I have received anything yet.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm going to check with the department then today. Thanks, Mary.
Yep.
I have not received anything.
You haven't either, Joe? Okay.
I'll watch for it though.
Yeah, they were supposed to go out on the 15th, and I was surprised that I hadn't heard from anybody about it. And I was like, gosh, I wonder what's happening, because I don't know exactly how it's being released. And so I will do some more checking. I'm gonna just make myself a note.
I'm going to mute myself again.
No problem, thanks. Okay. So those, as I said, those designations were supposed to be out on the 15th. And there were 90 districts identified as intensive. And there are going to be some tools and resources coming from the department soon. There isn't any required action as far as a systematic plan for folks that are identified as intensive or targeted. However, if you were identified as intensive, there are corrections that have to be made in the iStar system to some more IEPs. So that's was supposed to also be released as part of this on Monday, that you would know how many IEPs didn't pass in the review and which ones need to be corrected. So I'm a little, I guess I'm not surprised, but I'm a little kind of anxious to see how that all is being communicated out, because there's a lot there to kind of sort through and figure out. So I will do my best to get that figured out, and we will work individually with districts to make sure everybody knows what needs to be corrected within the iStar system. Graduation change. We're going to spend some time on this administrative consideration document. I have it as a slide here in a little bit, so we'll come back to that. Remember, that is supposed to impact current 9th graders that are in your district. Now this here is interesting that it says transfer ins, because that's the first I've heard of that it would impact transfer ins. I'm assuming they mean freshman transfer ins, not if you had a senior transfer in, that it would impact them. The IEP IFSP system. So we did an RFP, the state did an RFP last spring. They were really excited about a vendor, thought we had, we were really going to have this great tool. And one of the other vendors filed some level of complaint about the RFP process. And so it ground the whole thing to a halt. And they had to have a hearing around this appeal of the RFP process. That happened the end of August. And so all of the closing briefs and everything have been submitted, and they're waiting. They expect to have a decision by November 5th. So if the state kind of wins, then they're supposed to be able to move forward with the vendor that they've chosen. But if they don't win, then they have to repeat the RFP process. So it's a little frustrating in getting this up and going and moving. We have not changed our timeline of wanting to have this ready for the 2021 school year. But clearly, if this continues to be drug out, it's going to impact the timeline, which is unfortunate, because we've kind of band-aided together the IMS system to get us to 2021. So it's going to be really interesting if it has to get pushed back, because IMS is just kind of hanging on to get us there. This is just a reminder about this Iowa Special Education reference. And I'm going to click on that because I've shared it a couple times, but I don't know that I've ever really demoed it much. And so this website, when it comes up, I find it to be slow. I guess I should have had it loaded. So what this website is, it's a resource that the department set up that has all of the federal law in it. It has any letters from OSEP, which is the Federal Office of Special Education Programs. And it also has Iowa code, and then any guidance documents that have been provided by the Department of Ed. And it also has case law in it. So it has judicial decisions that they've selected that are relevant to special education. And so the idea is that you can come in here and type in a topic. And so I'm just going to use service animals because I don't think it'll give me a whole lot of things. So you type that in, and then it brings up so this would be federal code that it brings up. And you can, it's not very easy to follow, I don't think, but it's, so like if you just click on these, the blue icons are a door. And so that means if you click on them, then you can see another thing. So like the selected judicial decisions, this was a recent case, this Fry versus Napoleon around service animals. So you can put in a topic and you can find the federal law, and here's something from OSEP that they put together. But you see how many times I have to click. That's the piece of it that's not great. But it is a easy way, instead of just doing a Google search or trying to go to the department's website or trying to go into the federal, like the OSEP website, you can come here, type in your topic, and then you just start clicking, and it keeps breaking it down until you get to the information that you're looking for. I use it quite a bit, actually. It's just not super user-friendly from the number of times you have to click to get down to the information, but I usually find what I'm looking for if I'm in there. So just a resource to be aware of. And then the other update that I was going to share a little bit about anyway is the Procedures Governance Council. And so I'm sure you're all aware of our 800-page procedures manual. And in the past, that state document has been kind of annually updated every July. And it has been a group of folks from all the AEAs working together to bring forward topics that there's still confusion about. If there's something that seems like there's not a alignment between one section and another section, or if there's been changes or interpretation to the law that's changed that impacts procedure, that kind of would come forward. The group would work through it, update, and we would put out kind of the release notes every July, and then the manual would be updated. While that document has been wonderful and there's a ton of great information in there, it's not overly user-friendly, and it's very cumbersome to update because it's just a massive Word document that somebody has to go in and look for where there are, where page 200 doesn't match what's on page 600. There's no real way to find that without literally going through it page by page. So the department and the AEAs decided last spring that they wanted to invest some time and resources into developing a web-based tool for procedures. What we envision is this really, really robust website where you'll be able to type in a topic and information will pop up on that topic, and it will work better than the one I just showed you that had lots of clicks. We want it to be really user-friendly. We're really starting to talk about who are the users, what do those people want to know, how do we keep the text to a minimum but give people links to the resources that they need, so you don't click and have to read 2 or 3 pages of information to get the information that you need. And we're also talking about hoping that we can use some sort of smart logic, or the process where when people ask questions more and more, that it starts to learn what people want. It starts to, the search engine becomes smarter over time. We're really looking to have some sort of technology like that. The other piece that we're looking at is that it will interface with the new web IEP IFSP system, so that if a teacher is in the web IEP, has a question about a section, it should be able to immediately click on something and get the guidance and the support that she needs, versus it being the separate document. So this is the work that Melissa Tandy, that I mentioned earlier, is doing for the department and the AEA. She is developing this tool. Currently, we have a couple work teams that are working on what should the platform look like? What do we need for specifications so that we can get an RFP going to get this system purchased and built. Our goal is to have some sort of tool ready by next school year. It may not be all encompassing yet, but at least be a good start down that road, and then we will continue to build it. We'll see if we can pull that off yet. But that's the work that is happening around procedures that I'm actually really excited about, and I'm part of that work for the state directors. There is a joint letter being drafted around eligibility that we had hoped to have out in October, but I haven't seen it yet. So as soon as I get that, I'll be sharing that with you. And that again is a little bit more about those implications of AW. And then Amy just included 3 different learning opportunities that are coming up. And I have a flyer for you built into the PowerPoint that's got most of these. It doesn't have the DCDT conference listed. But that is a really great opportunity. It's not very often we have a national conference happen in Iowa, but that is the CEC, the Council for Exceptional Children, the Division of Career and Development and Transition is having their annual conference coming up this month in Cedar Rapids. So great opportunity close to home around transition. Okay, that was a lot of updates from Amy, and that actually takes care of the things that I had on that list too. Okay. So, reevaluations and exits. So, a couple years ago now, it's amazing how fast time flies. There was a decision, and it was called the AW case here in our state. It was a due process. It was actually out of Heartland AEA, and AW was a young. I don't even know if it was a young girl or a young boy. After all this time, I'm not sure that anyone has ever said that. Doesn't really matter. But this was a student who was diagnosed with dyslexia and had been homeschooled for several years and returned to the elementary in maybe 2nd or 3rd grade. And parents brought her back to school because she had this diagnosis of dyslexia and they were sure she needed special ed services. Heartland did, over the course of a couple of years, they did 3 evaluations and found her not eligible each time that they did this evaluation. And so the parents, after the 3rd evaluation, filed due process because they felt that their daughter should have special ed services. So what I thought might be helpful is to talk a little bit about the decision, but also a little bit about the facts of the case, because I think it helps paint a picture. So in the end, what happened is the ALJ said there was a point in time during the past several years that she believed AW should have been found eligible. However, at the time of the due process hearing, the last evaluation that had been done, she agreed with Heartland that she was no longer eligible at that point. So it's kind of a little complicated situation, because in the end, she agreed with Heartland that they had made the right decision. However, as she went back through the facts of the case, there was a point in time when she did not agree with what Heartland had decided. And so it really was around that idea of how big does the problem need to be. And she felt that at one point there was enough evidence to say this student needed special education services to make progress. And so I want to talk a little bit about what was happening at that point for the student. So she was below grade level at that point. However, not what we at that point were talking about in numerical discrepancies of significantly discrepant. She wasn't, if you looked at a standardized assessment, there was a point in time, which we've moved past, but I think is important, is looking at things like the 12th percentile as kind of a cut score to help you make that decision. And this case really came back and said, you can't use a numerical cut score. Discrepancy is important. We still need to know if there's a problem. We still need to know how far behind somebody is, but you can't set a number and say, if you hit this number, that's enough of a discrepancy, or it's not enough of a discrepancy. That's just a piece of information that's part of the bigger picture. So the student was behind. She was receiving one-on-one instruction in reading from an interventionist. She was also getting small group instruction in her classroom that was on top of what was happening for the classroom. And the principal was meeting with her every day to do a math intervention. This district felt they could provide that. They could make that happen. The judge said, that was a lot of intervention. She was pretty far behind. And her progress, while she was making some nice progress, it was pretty intensive what she needed to be able to do that. And so the judge felt that at that point in time, they should have found her eligible for special education. At the end of the case, when they did the third evaluation, she was at grade level. She was part of just what was happening in core, with occasional reteaching or pre-teaching of something with the gen ed teacher when there was something she wasn't getting, but there was no intensive supports in place. She had closed that gap. She was doing what she needed to do. And the judge said, you're right, she doesn't need special education at that point. And so what this case has done is telling us that we can't use cut scores to look at discrepancy. We can't use numerical discrepancies to make that decision. And discrepancy is just one piece of the puzzle, which we always knew. But I think, unfortunately, because numbers are easy and people like how black and white they are, it probably got overused. And so discrepancy still is important. It just can't be the thing that decides what's happening. And we can't have any level of cut score that determines a yes or a no. The other thing that the case said was specially designed instruction may or may not be beyond the capacity of the gen ed setting. So in this situation, when the judge said, you should have found her eligible, that was all happening in the gen ed setting. They had title teachers, they had the principal, they had the gen ed teacher, all providing this support. And just because they could do that isn't the deciding factor of whether that's special education or not. And that's a really subtle kind of nuance that teams are going to have to really think through now. And so really it's about how intense is it? How much extra time is that taking? How long do we think it's going to take? How different is it from what we're doing for other students? And then we have to make a decision on, does that equal special education? Do we need to guarantee that for the student? And so that's kind of the facts of the case that I wanted to lay out and say that the AEAs have been working on helping our folks understand this and talk through how this impacts initial eligibility, but it also impacts reevals and exits. Because when we think about numerical discrepancies, I've often heard teams say, well, now he's at the 25th percentile on his Iowa assessment, so we should exit him. Well, that's a piece of data that the team's going to look at, but there's no longer any sort of cut score that would say, oh, he's above this number or he's below this number, so we should be considering exit for the student, or we should be getting rid of that goal. It's a bigger global picture that we have to look at. So here are some of the things that I think impact schools, and then I want to talk just a few minutes about what does this mean in your mind for special ed teachers, and what can we do to support them? Because that's going to be our next step, is we need to start helping teams understand these implications. So one of the things is, if we aren't going to be focused on these numerical discrepancies and putting a lot of weight on these numbers, and this kind of is one of those, well, this just makes sense. We really should be looking at actual instruction. We should really be looking at the Iowa core standards and how are students doing compared to the expectations that schools set for them, versus spending all of our time doing some sort of normed assessment that's just giving us this number that may or may not help us figure out what the student needs. And so our folks are really going to be asking teachers about the standards and about instruction, and starting to really dig into how is a student responding to what they've been provided, and what does that tell us compared to the other kids that are in that setting. We will continue to use progress, discrepancy, and need to make those decisions. A big piece of what the law says is that the purpose of an initial evaluation is to determine what does a student need, and then does that require special education to address that need. So really digging into what a student needs is the primary purpose of that evaluation. The determination of if it requires special education is really secondary. So we're really going to be looking instructionally at students. Things like cut scores are not going to be deciders for exits. That if we can't use it to bring kids in, we can't use it to bring kids out. So while that's important data to tell us how big is the problem, how far behind are they, how close are they to their peers, in and of itself, there are no cut scores, no 40th percentile, no 16th percentile that would be like this decider. And that students or teams are really just going to have meaningful discussions about what students need to be successful. So feel like I just threw out a whole bunch of information, but I'm curious from your perspective, how this differs from how you think your teams are currently thinking about reevaluations and exits, and what you think would be helpful for us to do for special ed teachers and IEP teams. And if you don't have any ideas right now or thoughts, please send them my way, but I will give a second here in case you have some feedback you want to give us. Sorry, my little heater is cooking me. Okay, well, if you have thoughts on this, please send them my way, because it's really something that I can see Shami, along with our special ed support team, really trying to figure out how can we help teachers understand this better. The other case that we've talked about in the past, but I'm going to continue to bring up regularly because I really think that this impacts a lot of the decisions that we make, is the FAPE standard. And so back in 1982, there was the Rowley standard, which basically said some benefit. And that's what courts have been working with as their standard since 1982. And 2 years ago, we had the Andrew F. case that really changed that standard. And so I put the actual wording right in here just as a reminder that it's really about the school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances, and that all students should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. So it's really about more than just making a little bit of progress. It's about having challenging objectives that are moving kids forward in light of their circumstances. In the case, they talk about if a student is spending the majority of their time in the gen ed setting doing the general curriculum, then those challenging objectives probably should be about grade level material, that they're making progress from year to year. For other students, if that's not where they're spending their time or the work they're working on, then it's really about thinking about what are the circumstances for the student and how can we make sure that we have challenging objectives and we're not just copying from year to year the same goal and kids are making minimal growth towards that. So I think that's another important piece of this whole reevaluation process is, have we developed an IEP that is reasonably calculated to help the student make progress? That should be a piece of every IEP meeting, but especially at reeval time, so that we're making sure. I always think about the reeval as kind of an opportunity to right the ship, because for 3 years we've been kind of working down this path, and it gives us a chance to relook at our data and say, are we heading the direction we want, or do we need to right our ship and move it a little bit different? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about exiting special ed students. I'm hoping to get some more guidance from Thomas Mays about this, and we have a meeting coming up with him. But right now, within the IEP system, there are more than this, but these are the most common exit codes that get used. And so 2 of these, the RRG, which is Return to Gen Ed, and the PRC, which is Parent Revoke Consent, both end with the student no longer being eligible for special education. The other 3 codes, Dropout, RRT, which is no longer attending their special ed services, and CPI, without dual enrollment, retain the eligibility for the student. And what I just want to talk about today is that we really want to be thoughtful about how we exit students, because if you exit a student using the RRT code instead of the PRC or the RRG, that student remains eligible, and in essence, they still have all of the same protections as a special ed student around discipline, and that you should be offering an annual IEP meeting for those students. Now, what we're really trying to get from Thomas is, when would RRT be appropriate, so that we can give some very clear guidance about that. But what I would say is, in our conversations at directors, we think that maybe we have been a little bit Iowa nice about exits, and that there are times when parents are really choosing to not have their student in special education, and instead of saying, that's fine, you can revoke your consent, and having them put that in writing so that that student becomes a true gen ed student, we are saying, well, we can exit him with RRT, say that you're not accessing services, and then if they pops back up, he's still eligible. I think everybody's been doing it thinking there's good intentions in doing that. But as we have been digging into it, I think there are some risks in leaving students eligible that really shouldn't be. And so if it's a student that the IEP team says, you know, I think he actually can make it in gen ed with some accommodations that we can do, then we should be using the RRG code and sending him back into gen ed no longer eligible. If it's a situation where parents are saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want him to do this, maybe he's going to go to the non-pub and I don't want to access those services, then we should be using the parent revokes consent and again, making them not eligible. And so I did do some digging through on this, and in the last 2 years, in 16-17 as an agency, we exited 24 students with the RRT code. And in 17-18, we exited 43 students with the RRT code. And so it's not a huge number of kids, but I think it's worth thinking about. And if you're interested in knowing who those kids were, I'd be happy to send you the list from your district. And some districts didn't have any, but it may be something that we want to back up and look at and think about cleaning up and saying, okay, let's go back to that student, the students from 2 years ago. Let's offer an IEP meeting. Parents say, nope, don't want special ed, don't want an IEP meeting. Then have them put that in writing and we'll change the code to PRC so that we have that student no longer eligible. Or if the team says, you know, really, we should have used RRG in the first place because it was about him going back and being successful in that setting, then hold an IEP meeting, have that conversation, and change that code. I just think that there's enough gray to that it might be worth exploring. Again, I'm waiting for Thomas to give us some guidance on when RRT really makes sense so that I can share that out. I'd hope to have that for today, and I was going to pull this slide completely, but I thought I at least wanted to get it out there and get it on your radar that if you have students that are exited with a code that says still eligible, we really should be thinking about how are we tracking those kids as far as for discipline purposes, meaning their 10 days, and then also making sure we're annually checking back in to offer an IEP meeting, and we should be documenting that we're doing that. Any questions about that? Oh, okay. This is the graduation information that I shared earlier this month in my report. And I just wanted to take a few minutes and walk through it together and see if there are specific questions that folks have that I can take forward to the department. So really this change is required because of ESSA, and that they had to change the definition of a high school diploma to align with ESSA for special education students. And so that regular high school diploma means the standard high school diploma awarded to the preponderance of students in the state that's fully aligned to state standards, or a higher diploma, except that the regular diploma shall not be aligned to alternate academic achievement standards as described in code. So the important thing there is to realize that the standards that are aligned to your diploma cannot be the essential elements, which are what they're talking about with alternate academic standards. It can't be a different set of standards. It has to be Iowa core. And also that a regular high school diploma is not recognized as something like a certificate of completion or a certificate of attendance or a lesser credential. There is only one regular high school diploma. And in order to get that high school diploma, you have to meet the standards that your district have set for graduation to receive that high school diploma. And so what the code in Iowa says is that you have to meet 4-3-3-3. So 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 3 years of social studies, 3 years of science. That's what is the minimum in our state to receive a high school diploma. So districts have authority to tighten that up even more and add additional requirements to that. However, for the purposes of thinking about special education students, it probably behooves us to start at 4333 and decide what additional would we want to have in policy for special education students to graduate. Districts are required to have a policy already around graduation of special education students. So it'd probably be good to go back and look at what do you currently have in your board policies, because likely it's going to need some work, because in the past we were able to graduate students per their IEP. So kids wouldn't have to meet any sort of standard set of requirements to get a diploma. And what we've learned is that we can no longer do that with ESSA. So students can graduate with 4333, or they can graduate with 4333 plus something additional that the IEP team says. So maybe it's plus they're going to be successful in this work experience thing, plus they're going to meet this IEP goal, plus they're going to make progress on this other IEP goal. But it can't be less than 4333. So Barb Guy tried to talk through a few of the implications here to help districts start thinking about this, because really we need to start looking at policy this year and starting to make these changes, because this is impacting your freshman class. And if we don't get them figured out early, you don't want to have somebody kind of behind the 8 ball down the road. So important to remember that districts retain that decision-making authority in how students meet 4333. So those are years. It's not tied to Carnegie units. It's not tied to specific courses. So you could, in your policy, talk about it more generally than maybe what you have for gen ed students, as far as maybe you have a requirement of algebra 1, maybe you have a requirement of biology. You may have some specific courses for gen ed students that they must graduate. In your special ed policy for graduation, you may choose to not have those specific courses. You can have them, but again, you're kind of narrowing down the students that can get that diploma. The biggest thing to remember is the whole point of this is to set high expectations. And at the same time, you do have the ability and the discretion to decide what in our school will meet a year of math, what will meet a year of English. It may be that you look at a special education English class and feel it's tied to the standards appropriately. So you're going to give a year's worth of English for that special ed English class. There may be another class that you say, yeah, that isn't tied at all to any standards. We can't in good faith say that class equals a year of English or a year of science. And if you have classes like that, it will be worth spending some time looking at, could we get it aligned to the standards? Could we increase our expectations so that our special ed students are meeting higher standards? They're meeting those challenging objectives. And you could give a science credit for this special ed science class that they're taking. You can also look at things like work experience, and really it's going to be hard work, but I think it could be very worthwhile to say, okay, this student needs another year of math. As we're building this work experience for him, how could we get a year's worth of math out of this year's work experience so that we can issue a year of math for going on the job site? May be appropriate, may not. It really is going to be IEP teams digging in and deciding how do things meet standards. I also think prior to IEP teams, it's going to be about special ed teachers and administrators digging into those classes and deciding how do these align, so that as they're building schedules for students, they're able to say in IEP meetings, we want him to take this class and this class because that's going to meet a graduation requirement that he needs to get his diploma. So it isn't going to be, it's not going to, I don't want you to put everything on your IEP teams to decide. There needs to be this level of policy work in the district and then teacher administrator work to make these alignments. And then it will be IEP teams that have some discretion in deciding how are we going to get there with what the district has to offer, if that makes sense. The other piece of it that they talk in here very specifically about in that bullet number 3 is that you may provide a certificate of completion or a certificate of attendance to students who do not complete 4333. And so there may be students that the team just feels they can't meet those standards. And in the past in Iowa, we have issued them a diploma more than likely. and we won't be able to do that anymore. So it's going to be really important that teams put a lot of thought into not only how are we making these decisions, how are we communicating it so that we don't have parents get to senior year and that's the first time they're hearing my child's not going to get a diploma. That's going to be something that we need to start talking about way, way, way earlier as we're building their 4-year schedule, to be able to know we're on a path to a diploma, or maybe we're not on a path to a diploma, or maybe we're not sure yet, so we're going to be heading this way, but there's a chance it might not be a diploma in the end. I think it's going to save you a lot of grief and a lot of teary parents if we start having those conversations earlier. So next steps that are supposed to be coming, there is a document linked right in here. If you have questions or concerns, you can put them right in there. And this Kristen Lane, who's just been hired, that's going to be her job, is to help put together this guidance. The department has been trying to work with IASB to develop some policy language that hasn't gotten very far yet, but they're still continuing to try to partner so that there will be some additional supports available. I just really wanted to spend a little bit time going a little deeper than what I did a couple weeks ago. So any questions around this or things that you think would be helpful for Keystone to be able to support you through this work?
And then I think one question that I have, or that I think is going to be coming up, is if students are having modifications to their coursework or to the expectations or to the grading, how will that play out? Will that be more up to the school boards and the districts whether or not to award credit for that, or will it be an AP team decision?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's going to be interesting to see where does that decision making lever kind of live. Is it living with IEP teams completely, or I really think that the heavy lift to make this work the best is if schools and administrators are thinking through all of those things and saying, okay, when we have students that get accommodations in the class, yep, no brainer, those kids are going to get credit for taking that class. Okay, let's talk about kids that have it modified. How much modification still aligns to the standards and we feel like we can, in good faith, give a math credit for that class? Because it's really a district discretion of if they give that credit or not. What we don't want is us to just water down our expectations. And at the same time, it is okay to make individualized, those decisions about, yeah, maybe it's not at as high of a level of thinking, but he's getting at the standards. And we feel good about that. So we feel like with these modifications, we would issue a year's worth of math for that class. And I really see looking at like the special education, if you're doing any sort of pull-out classes, to really look at what are the standards, what's the curriculum, can we make that alignment so that we can give math and English and science and social studies credit for those courses. I do think it's possible to get credit for a modified class, but it's going to be making sure that it's a robust class. It may not be at the level of the traditional class, but that it's still aligned to the standards and challenging. Does that help, Shami? Good. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. Where am I at? Right here? Okay. The other one that I realized I had in my thing at the beginning, and I don't have a slide in here, but I will take just a minute to talk about, because we are going to be getting some updated guidance from Thomas Mays around services in the non-public schools is what the guidance is going to be around. But the topic primarily is around picking and choosing of services. And the guidance has always been that special education is not a menu, and that parents don't get to just look through and say, well, I want the reading goal, but I don't want the math goal, or I want this thing and I don't want that. And at the same time, every IEP is unique to meet the individual needs of a student. And so We can't head down a path where, well, because you're in special ed, everybody gets the reading and the math goal. If there's a legitimate reason for that student to not have a math goal, the IEP team should be having that conversation. And it may be appropriate to meet mom's request of, I don't want a math goal, because when you look at the data for this student, they could get FAPE without it. And so while we can't allow picking and choosing, what I just want to say is it really behooves IEP teams to go back to that idea of FAPE and having a conversation about, if parents don't want X, can we as a team agree that the student is still going to get FAPE without that? If the answer is yes, then go ahead and meet the parent's request. If the answer is no, then you have to say, sorry, by law, we have to offer FAPE. This is what we really believe is FAPE. And parents then have two options. Three options. One, they can agree. Two, they can revoke consent and not get any special ed services. Or three, they can follow a dispute resolution process, request mediation, request a due process hearing. We certainly always want to be collaborative and work with families. And I am not pushing for, let's go in and, start some conflicts, but I think it is a good reminder around the fact that we do have an obligation to provide FAPE. And so one of the areas for our agency that we'll be looking at is instructional versus support services, and making sure that if a student really needs both for FAPE, that we're ensuring both are happening and not just one or the other. And so we'll be doing some internal training here on that. And as I said, there'll be some more guidance coming from Thomas, but just kind of a heads up that we'll spend some more time on that. And as soon as his information comes, I'll include it in a report and we'll spend some time talking about it. Okay. The last thing that I had for you today was just a reminder of the additional learning opportunities planned for this year. Some of these are things Keystone's doing. Some of them are things that are happening in our state. So we have the meeting today that's listed here. Coming up November 8th and 9th is the Tri-State Law Conference in Omaha. It's the cool thing about that conference is it's all about our circuit. They bring in people to talk about the case law that happens in our circuit, which is nice versus some law conferences that you go to. It's a lot of national stuff, and not that the national stuff doesn't impact us, but it doesn't directly impact us as closely as the things within our circuit, because if a decision is made in our circuit, then that kind of becomes the standard of law within our states. And so it's a good conference. iCase, if you're looking for some special ed law things specific to Iowa, iCase is a great option. That's going to be in Des Moines on November 15th. The flyer is there with the registration information. Thomas Mays is going to be speaking for several hours about just special ed law in Iowa and how things apply here. Barb Guy is going to be talking some. She's our director of special education for the state. And we also have Scott Lesnick coming, who is going to share about the different generations in the workplace, and as leaders, how we can support our employees based on some generational differences. And then also he's going to share his I think it's called Kid Jacked story. And it's really about just kind of an inspirational story around overcoming adversity, which I think in special education, we're always helping and pushing to get past things that are difficult for students. And so I think it'll be a great message. We'll meet again this way in January. And then in March, we did this last year. I have not got the information yet, but CASE, the national organization, does a hybrid conference every March. And so that's going to be on March 7th and 8th. Last year, we spent a day with Randy Sprick and a day with Julie Weatherby, one day on behavior and one day on special ed law. And it's all through Zoom. They send us the link. We put them up on the big screen down in D23. And so we'll do that in combination with our March meeting. And you're welcome to come for one or both days of that. Okay, any questions, topics we need to make sure we tackle in the future, or we have time now we can tackle?
Can we go back to that compliance piece that we talked about right away?
Yep.
Okay. So is that, would that be under the IDEA Part B desk audit?
It might be in CASA.
Yep, because that popped up on Monday, I see. I guess I'm not 100% sure I'm looking at the same thing I have in the past since my iStar isn't working today.
I bet that's what it is, Joe, because they
Okay.
said they were going to try to do it through CASA.
Okay, there's four bullets here. There's let's see, an introduction, OSEP compliance indicators, idea part B, oh my gosh, my mouth won't work. Implementation support rubrics and differentiated accountability support levels. I'm not sure if everyone would have access to that. My superintendent is in this thing all the time, and I'm not in it as often as he is. So when I checked with him, you might want to just check up the line and see if anybody's noticed it.
Okay, that's a great thing. Yes, we can check with superintendents, make sure they go in and look. Joe, would you mind screenshotting what you got and sending it to me so I can see what it looks like?
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Then
Yep.
I can try to be more helpful to people. It's hard when I can't, I'm not able to see it to give you.
Well, and again, I'm not 100% sure this is the right thing, but it showed up on Monday, and
I'm guessing it is because
right wording in it.
The fact that it's Part B and it showed up on Monday are two good indicators that that's probably what it is.
Sounds good.
Thank you for sharing.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? And I think we're good. Thanks everyone for joining us. And I will post this on our website if you need to go back and review something or want to share with teachers or fellow administrators. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you, Annette.
Yep. Bye-bye.